Hi, everybody. I just wanted to welcome you here. I just opened it up live so the room could populate. We'll wait a couple more minutes to start just to get as many people in that are wanting to hear. We have another great panel. We're going to try and keep it just to an hour. Some of us may be able to stay on past that hour, but everyone that's speaking will give 2 to 5 minutes on their different topics, on updates in the last week or so, and then obviously you can populate questions as they come in. We have a list of some of the questions that have come in on the listserv and on the different areas. We'll try and get to all of them, but we'll go live with the panel in about 2 minutes. Thanks.
Dean.
Okay, we're going to go live right now. So again, thank you all for coming. We have one panelist who's running a little late. She's actually on another webinar, Dr. Feinberg, but she'll be on shortly. So I want to thank everyone who's in attendance. I want to thank the panelists again. We have a couple different voices this time, and we'll try and rotate this through weekly. As I mentioned 5 minutes ago, we're going to try and keep this to an hour if we can. If any of us can stay on past the hour, we will, to try and get to as many questions and points, but we want to try and keep these a little concise and try and hit on all the topics that there might be some updates. So I think to start, it looks like some positive news, but Dr. Danishmand is going to speak a little bit about on some of the medical research that's come in the last week or so since our last town hall. So Saeed, if you want to talk.
Thanks so much, Dean, and hello to all of you. Hope you're staying healthy and safe. An honor to be among you and in this community to help intended parents, surrogates, egg donors, and all those affected. I wanted to give you some good news and sort of a ray of optimism in regards to the latest research studies. Just to let you know, for example, there are over 40 companies worldwide that are working on a vaccine for this particular coronavirus. This virus, apparently, unlike the SARS virus, does not mutate as much, and so the vaccines should be even more effective than they are in cases such as the influenza virus or the previous SARS epidemic that we saw significantly back in 2008. So that's good news in regards to a vaccine, but I think we are still, based on the research studies, about somewhere between 8 to 12 months away from a working vaccine. The good news is that the NIH-backed initial clinical trial of the first vaccine that's available has already started. It involves 45 volunteers. It started in Washington State. So far, I have a colleague who's involved in this particular trial. So far, it looks like all the participants have had no ill effects, no significant side effects from the vaccine. So far it's good news, but we won't know for another 8 to 12 months whether this vaccine is effective or not. So that's some good news in regards to the vaccine. There was a recent study just published on the 23rd in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and essentially it was a review of the most recent data that we have available on COVID-19 pandemic and pregnancy. I can certainly send you a link of this particular study. It's a PDF file. The study was published on March 23rd online. I don't believe it's actually available in print yet. But so far, to date, it looked at the outcomes of 55 patients, pregnant patients, and 46 newborns. And the majority of these studies are coming out of the University of Wuhan, where the epidemic first started. And to date, there's no evidence of vertical transmission. Now, that does not mean that newborns cannot become affected by COVID-19, because we believe that after birth, there is a risk of transmission to the newborn. But thankfully, it looks like the newborns and children under age 10 years of age seem not to be as affected by this particular virus. The best study that we have is one that actually looked at 1,400 children below the age of 10 who had symptoms of the coronavirus. About 12%, 171, were actually diagnosed with COVID-19. Only 3 children needed ICU support, and all the children who needed, all 3 of them actually had pre-existing conditions such as leukemia. So that's good news in regards to the younger population. Now, what about pregnancy itself? As we talked about before, if someone is pregnant and they develop COVID-19, we believe that still about 80% of those who develop COVID-19 symptoms and are diagnosed have mild to moderate symptoms and have full resolution and recovery within about 14 days. But there are a smaller group of patients, percentage of patients, that may have severe symptoms. Because of some of the mechanical and physiological changes that occur in pregnancy, and some immunological changes. For example, in pregnancy, the immune cells, called the T helper cells, have a change. In other words, in pregnancy, you have more type 2 helper T cells than type 1, and type 1 are the ones that combat viral infections. So there is a chance that if someone were to be pregnant and have severe symptoms, that could have an effect on the pregnancy. Now, what kind of effects? A recent study showed a higher risk of miscarriage in the first trimester and a higher risk of preterm labor and delivery. And a very small percentage of patients also ended up having some fetal growth restriction. Why is that? That's because if patients have pneumonia as a result of COVID-19, that actually can cause respiratory compromise. It can cause hypoxia or a decrease in oxygen saturation, and that actually can affect the placenta, decrease blood oxygenation with the placenta, and decrease in oxygen delivery to the fetus. And so there may be a very small group of patients that may have some growth restriction of the fetuses. And so that's something that needs to be followed, and further studies are needed. Now, the good news in regards to treatment during pregnancy, if pregnant patients were to fall ill and have severe symptoms and would need ventilatory support because of pneumonia, then the 2 current treatments that seem to have some efficacy apparently are available for pregnant patients. The first is remdesivir, which is an antiviral agent. Gilead Sciences, which is a company that actually makes this particular medication, just recently, just a few days ago, said that the only way to get this medication is via clinical trials, but they will make exceptions for patients who are immunocompromised, and they'll make exceptions in pregnant patients. So that was good news in terms of coming out of that particular company. And there are currently 5 large clinical trials with this medication that seems to have the most promise in fighting this particular infection. And the results, preliminary results of remdesivir, seem to be very promising. And if we can now use it potentially more proactively, especially in pregnant patients, this would be good news if pregnant patients were to fall ill with significant symptoms of pneumonia. We believe that with these 5 clinical trials, at least 2 of the large clinical trials will have information in early April. So I think we're about 2 weeks away from having even more information in regards to combating this virus. The other medication that's actually being used now, and there's been a lot of controversy about it, is chloroquine, which is typically a malaria medication, but chloroquine has been used to combat viral infections. What it does, it prevents the binding of the virus to cells, and of course, cells in the lung and the pulmonary tree are the ones that are significantly affected. And the good news is, if the clinical trials show that chloroquine is effective, either alone as a standalone medication or with another medication called Zithromax or azithromycin, chloroquine has no ill effects in pregnancy in all trimesters. So it can be used during pregnancy without any evidence of fetal malformations or fetal effects or effects to the pregnant patient. So I think some good news coming from the research front, and I have a great deal of confidence and optimism in regards to all of the researchers and all the healthcare workers around the world that are really working tirelessly to find the best treatment options, vaccines, and of course, great kudos to some of the heroes on the front lines, nurses, doctors, medical assistants that are working tirelessly in hospitals around the world, taking care of patients who've fallen ill because of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Donishman. So now I'm going to invite Dr. Feinberg, who spoke last week. Dr. Feinberg's at Northwestern Fertility and Reproductive. She's also on the ASRM task force that is dealing with this, and I believe they had a meeting last night. So she's going to give us any updates she may have, or just in general what the ASRM picture looks like. So Dr. Feinberg, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks so much for having me again. So the task force is working diligently. As many of you may have heard, there was a letter that was drafted to the ASRM task force by a group calling themselves the Fertility Providers Alliance, largely, I think 100% private practice freestanding clinics that oppose the guidelines. And there's actually like a live debate that's being hosted on the topic. And I think that, you know, at ASRM, we're trying to really tease out the issues of conflict of interest. How do we make decisions while adhering to the principle of first, do no harm? The ASRM recommendations are, at this point in time, going to be upheld at least for another 2 weeks. But we are starting to think forward once the curve starts to flatten in terms of looking at the R naught, or the idea of how many one person who's infected. R naught is the public health term to look at how many people that infected person then infects. And right now in our country, we're looking at that as about 5. The death toll in New York is tripling every 60 hours. And so we are keeping a very close track. Johns Hopkins website has a minute-to-minute update on the number of new cases. We are tracking. We are currently ahead of Italy. Our curve is steeper than China. We are nowhere near the inflection point of starting to flatten that curve. And so ASRM is still adhering to this principle of suppression, which is very much in line with what other organizations have put forth. We are, you know, trying to look at once that curve gets flattened, how do we then balance the principles? We spent a lot of time talking about the ethical principles of autonomy, patient autonomy versus societal. And during times of pandemics, we have to look at what's best for society, sometimes over an individual relationship. And so we're struggling with trying to understand how do we guide our field moving forward, but with the first and foremost goal of safety at mind. And a lot of the arguments that are made about individuals really come secondary to the public health perspective by the CDC that is set forth on suppression of transmission of new cases. So that is the latest status. We are drafting an addendum to the recommendation to address some of these issues. That addendum will be posted no later than March 30th, probably not much sooner. and the task force meets on a very regular basis to keep track of recommendations and have open discussions with those that want to have more input into the recommendations. And I think very willing to hear some of the counter arguments to the recommendations. But as the death rate is tripling every 60 hours, now is really the time to work on the strategy of suppression.
Thank you, Dr. Feinberg. So I'm going to change tone a little. We're going to have Allison Wilson speak. So Allison spoke last week too. She's a psychologist in Colorado, and she's going to speak a little bit about the mental health issue, but also when we were having a little back and forth on our WhatsApp chat about particularly parents who are not being able to get in to see the birth of their child or not get into the hospital at all. She's written a wonderful blog about some things you can advise your clients to do, and I'm sure she'll share her blog site with everyone from there. So Allison, if you want to talk.
Great. Thank you, Dean. And I'm honored to be a part of this panel. And last week, if you joined us, we did talk about how intended parents who might be living from a foreign country or different state are having complications, being able to go into the hospital. But as we all know, that's really changed even more so, and that many hospitals are now restricting anybody except the laboring patient in the room. It really does vary, I think, hospital by hospital, but how heartbreaking. As you mentioned, Dean, we're talking about this as a panel, and it really broke all of our hearts knowing here a fertility patient has already gone through hell to try to have a baby and trauma, and then this. They may have convinced themselves that, okay, we need assistance, but at least we'll be there for the birth. And then now we're finding that's not happening, and rightly so. Intended parents are devastated, they're frightened, and so we need to help them. And so one thing I would suggest to recommend for your intended parents is if they can do something to either ritualize or to process or document this for their baby. So for example, writing a letter to their baby can be very emotional. Will they be a big puddle of mess? Yes, but therapeutic. And in this letter, they can write anything and everything on their heart about how they wish they were there, and the heartaches, but then also being able to celebrate this much anticipated baby. And just writing it out. We know from research, if you have pen to paper and write, in particular letter, how very therapeutic to get out those emotions, have some sense of control, and also again documenting that we were there. Maybe not right in the delivery room, but we were there. I think that could be helpful. If not writing a video, they can certainly video themselves and waiting, or making a documentary in that sense, and then showing it to their child later in life, I think can be immensely helpful. On the surrogate end, wow, and many women who are expecting a baby and don't know if they're going to be laboring and delivering by themselves, how incredibly frightening. And so for our surrogates, it's also helping them to this possibility. And I think one way to do that is, emphasizing, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know who's going to be in your room to help, but this is what we do know, that you have a team behind you. As an agency, we are here. If they're allowed to bring in their iPads or video okay, fine. But I would really remind the surrogate why she's doing this. And in all my years of doing surrogate screening, I yet to meet a surrogate who's doing it for the glory or the attention. She usually, it's a calling, and she loves being a mother herself and enjoyed pregnancy, and she wanted to give this gift to someone else. and fear can easily kind of sidestep what she originally, intended to do. As we know, most surrogates attach themselves to the intended parents and their story. So helping them to remember that, and helping them to see that, they really are the heroes or heroines in this event, and remind them of that. I think it might be also helpful if she can bring some item or object, if allowed, into the delivery room. If she's not able to have support herself, can it be a picture or something very meaningful, or a note from the intended parents or from their caseworker, saying we are right there with you, but that object can help her to focus on that and look at the bigger picture of why she's doing this. I also wanted to just let you know there are many ASRM mental health professionals that are now going online to help patients. So please remember that in whatever state you're in, that there is a lot of us that feel helpless as well, but we'll do whatever we can to help you, not only as a physician, an agency owner, or staff, or surrogate or donor, but we are certainly here to help. So thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass it on to the next panelist.
Thank you, Allison. And I'll definitely on our listserv, I'll share your blog site so people can get that message about the letter, et cetera. But thank you so much.
Good.
So I'm going to introduce now Carrie Flamer Powell, who is at All Family Surrogacy. She's also on SEEDS. And I know Carrie has helped a little bit in compiling this list of potential temporary help, and maybe she can speak a little bit on guardianship and temporary guardians, and as well as the kind of agency aspects that are going on. You there, Carrie?
Great. Yes, I'm here. Thank you for having me. Yes, so SEEDS asked me to speak a little bit about how surrogacy professionals can sort of come together and create and maintain connections and support networks at this time. So the first thing I'd like to suggest, if everyone on this call isn't already a member of the Surrogacy Professionals group on Facebook, that's the name Surrogacy Professionals, I'd highly suggest you join. As of this morning, there's 825 of us that have been in that group since it started in 2015, and it's surrogacy professionals of all sorts, agencies, lawyers, doctors, insurance professionals, mental health professionals, and it's a very active and helpful group. Definitely recommend joining that group at this time. And that leads me to the newborn caregiver spreadsheet that Dean mentioned. As the COVID-19 situation began to unfold, those of us in the Facebook group started to share on lots of different threads that we were available to help should the need arise for a newborn caregiver if intended parents could not be present for the birth. And so I just, put on my operations hat and said, I'll create a spreadsheet. I'll be the spreadsheet lady, and just created a basic spreadsheet to bring all of those resources together. And it's wonderfully, it has morphed into an interactive national map put together by SurroPlans, which you can now access not only an entire interactive network of surrogacy professionals who are willing to become newborn guardians, essentially, if the need arose in an emergency, but the interactive map will also show you live cases of COVID. It will show you international airports that are open. It will show you states that have open enrollment for insurance. And there's one other thing I'm forgetting, but they're updating it regularly, and I think it's a really great tool for everyone to have. So I'm happy to send that link to anyone who doesn't yet have it, or you can get it from the Surrogacy Professionals Facebook group. The other thing that was mentioned in the Surrogacy Professionals group, it was actually posted by Julie Allgood. I believe she's with Abundant Beginnings Surrogacy, and it was a great a post that she shared from her HR consultant, which was tips on messaging during difficult times and stressful times. And I thought that it had a lot of great tips. I won't go through all of them here, but there's sort of a step-by-step guide of how to be really mindful in your messaging that's going out to your clients, surrogates, parents, and how to get the information out there in a clear and transparent way, but also make sure that we're being really aware and mindful of everyone's emotional state at this point. So that post is available if you go to the Surrogacy Professionals group and search Julie Allgood's name, or again, I'm happy to send that to anyone who'd like it. One thing that my agency has been doing for the last 3 weeks, I'm sure most of us on this call are doing, providing at least weekly updates to all of your clients, surrogates, parents, just letting them know, what's changed, what are the main things I need to know right now, what are the things that might reassure them, or what are the things that they need to maybe be cognizant of right now. But putting out some sort of messaging at least weekly, I personally feel is important because we're all sort of untethered right now. And I'm happy to share the template that I've been using. We've been making sure to triage those announcements and addressing the people who have a birth in the next 90 days first, getting them all of that pertinent information, and then addressing those who are pregnant or waiting on a transfer, and then addressing those that are not yet matched. So we have different levels of communication going out, but the important thing is that it's going out. And I'm happy to share those tips. And the last thing that Seeds asked me to talk about are the opportunities to reach out and just create a little bit of levity and connection. In particular, I'm sure this can apply for lots of surrogacy professionals, but for agencies, what we're doing as an agency, we're holding virtual get-togethers for all of our surrogates across the country, and we're making them really fun. Trivia, prizes, really interactive, and making it a time to come together and connect, but also have a little bit of fun. So that's definitely something that can replace any in-person events that you may have had scheduled, or maybe it's something that you start doing that you haven't done before, but it's been really popular with our surrogates, and I think it could also apply to lots of different professionals. And the very last thing I'd like to mention is if you're in a position to do so, small tokens to your staff at this time are really helpful. Just something to let them know that we're in this together and we're going to get through this. And maybe that's a gift card, because most of us are quarantined. At least in Oregon, we're on complete shelter in place orders. But maybe that's a gift card for food delivery, or something that just lifts their spirits and makes their day a little easier. So that's what I have to share, and thanks again for having me.
Thanks, Carrie. So I'm gonna bring on Sarah Page right now to talk about insurance. I think you're self-muted, Sarah, so you'll have to unmute yourself. There you are.
Okay.
I actually will say that I did make a second page that does have a little levity to it, so I'll share page 2 so you don't have to just look at our names for the last 45 minutes or so. But there you go. There's working from home and some memes. But go, Sarah, you're up.
Okay, so I just wanted to go through what open and special enrollments are open currently, and then I'll touch upon the umbrella policy that we talked about a little bit last week, and then I will close with temporary guardianship and how that would look with the insurance companies. So we'll start with with the special enrollments, which would be the states that have special enrollment so far are California, Colorado, Connecticut, DC, Maryland, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Nevada, New York, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. So those are the only states right now that are offering special enrollment due to COVID-19. Of course, special enrollment for loss of job, or I guess the normal reasons, turning 26. Those are all open throughout the entire United States, but those states that I just listed are specific to opening up back to because of COVID-19. everyone keeps asking, for specific states if they're open or not. This is on the Surrogacy Professional Board, the one that Carrie said join. Please join. There's so much good information there. And that's being updated. I did update it as of this morning, just saying there have been no changes since Monday when I last updated it. So that's where you'll find the most up-to-date information regarding that. And really, if you have questions, of course, email us or call, but ultimately, all that information will be there, and that's the first place it will be updated. So moving on, the next thing I want to talk about was the umbrella insurance. So we talked to several of our carriers that we work with for whether or not the umbrella insurance would cover the caretaker. So if anyone on your staff decided to be a caretaker, could they come back and potentially, would you be liable as a company? And ultimately the answer is unless it is specifically defined within your scope of business, which is what we kind of talked about last week, that it would not even be covered underneath the umbrella policy, at least from this, we talked to a couple different carriers, that's what they said. Now, I encourage you, if you do have umbrella insurance, to go back to the company that you bought it from and to ask them that question. I'm not saying this is blanket across the board. This is just with the companies that we work with. Have said no, unless somewhere it's defined in the scope of business under which you bought your original insurance, you cannot add that to it. We've talked about, well, could they add it to it at this point in time? The way the insurance companies would work it at this point in time would be almost in a foster care situation, which means that they would have to be licensed. So right now, no, it's something that now, of course, is on their radar and scope, and they would like to further explore it. But ultimately, at this point in time, that's where we are. So most umbrella policies are not going to cover that underneath your liability insurance. Again, unless it's previously defined within your policy, and or adding it at this point in time, they don't have the specific writer to be able to add it. It would fall underneath foster care. So I just want to let everybody know at least what we found out with that. And then the last little piece of this, which kind of piggybacks to that, really has to do with we're getting some questions regarding temporary guardianship and what happens if somebody does, basically go court-ordered temporary guardianship for the baby, and could they then get insurance? And we talked about a little bit last week. Dean posed the question and kind of answered his own question at that point in time, which was, it's really dependent on the carrier, and it is going to be dependent on the carrier. So if you are in that situation where you may need a temporary guardian, and that's a feasible option for all parties, legally, everything else contractually, that with that, we want to check then, where it's the state where the guardian lives and what insurance policies would be available, reading their language as to whether it would be full guardianship or is temporary allowed. It has to be court ordered because it has to be a legal document that states that they are the temporary guardian. So that is potentially an option, but again, really want to focus on what state it's going to be, and it will be definitely carrier by carrier. So those are my current updates right now.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn to Carol Weathers from Seeds as well. I know Carol's going to talk a little bit about some agency issues, and then after Carol, we'll get into some of the legal and immigration, et cetera. But Carol, can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Really good information so far. And thank you for inviting me on the panel. My job today actually is to outline the financial relief programs. I am the treasurer for Seeds, and we had our meeting yesterday, and it was recommended that maybe I create this outline of the things that are out there and available, as we all are suffering, of course, in many ways, but certainly financially. So the first one I'm going to, and again, these are outlines. I will post all this information on our Seeds website, and they're also on ASRM. There's a lot of links and helpful things out there for everyone. So the first thing I'm going to touch on is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. It responds to the outbreak by providing paid sick leave, free testing. It has expanded the food assistance and unemployment benefits, and just requiring additional protection, particularly for the healthcare workers. There are exemptions though. Large employers with over 500 workers and small employers with under 50. They do not have to comply with this. The paid medical leave for childcare in conjunction with the Coronavirus Response Act is FMLA, and they're going to be providing 10 weeks of paid leave at 2/3 pay to the workers for caring for a child. But again, the same exemption applies, whether it's under 50 or over 500, they do not have to offer this. The last thing is a tax credit for employers. The same act authorizes refundable tax credit for employers. Talk to your CPA, whoever's doing this for you, I'm sure they'll know exactly how to do it. But also the Kaiser Family Foundation has put together a really nice summary of how this works. So feel free to look that up as well. The next item that I'm going to mention is the SBA. They have come up with an economic injury disaster loan program. Now, one problem is that their website seems to keep crashing. So I do know someone who got through though. It was the middle of the night and they were successfully able to apply. They are offering loans up to $2 million in assistance. And so if you can get through, that would be awesome. And if you do, can you let us know when you did that and how it went? That would be good information. The interest rates are low. I know they're less than 4%. And depending on the repayment terms, it can actually go as long as 30 years. So, but they are determined on a case-by-case basis. And then on that too is your governor, every governor has their own website, and you can see what their state and local small business assistance programs are. Again, I'll add that to the link that we're going to put together on the SEEDS website, so you can check it out. It has every single state on there. The next few talk about homeowners. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have already made it clear that you literally just need to call your servicer, phone numbers on your payment stub, and tell them that because of the coronavirus, you cannot make your mortgage payment. They're not asking for proof. They're not asking for anything. They're just saying, okay, we'll defer your mortgage for as long as 6 months. So there's that. And then if you have an FHA loan, similar, you can, but it's only a 60-day, it's either 60 days at a time or maybe just 60 days max. It wasn't super clear. And of course, there's a moratorium right now on foreclosures and evictions for single family homeowners. Something specific, San Francisco, I found are deferring business taxes until February 2021 with no interest or penalties. I thought that was very generous. And they've also developed a business resilience fund, and they will offer emergency grants of up to $10,000 for small businesses that can prove, of course, a recent loss of revenue. And Facebook has joined also in developing a grant program. They have pledged $100 million in grants for up to 30,000 eligible small business owners in over 30 countries that have been hit by the COVID-19 outbreak. It's not actually available yet, but you can go to their, go to Facebook, and there is a link there that you can click on for them to notify you as soon as it's up and running and you can apply. Bank of America, Citibank, Chase, Capital One, Discover, even American Express are all offering emergency support to its consumer and small business clients. Just takes a phone call, and to say, hey, I need some help here. And they've all pledged to do that. Everyone knows, I'm sure, about this stimulus bill that's in the works. I haven't looked since last night, so from what I understand, it's still not passed, but it is a $2 trillion coronavirus package. I think the most important aspect of it that I want to mention is, well, I'm sure there's a million, but I'm just going to say the small and medium businesses with fewer than 500 workers, which I think is, the bulk of us, will be able to apply for government-backed forgivable loans to cover the cost of their workers' wages and other expenses such as rent, up to a maximum of $10 million. But we have to see, of course, if that's going to pass. So keep an eye on that. Maybe by next week we'll have more information on that. And I just saw also, I got an email from Hertz, and they're offering free car rentals in New York City for healthcare workers, which is awesome. It's just amazing to see everyone come together and big, small, and otherwise, helping each other. So if you know of any other types of help, please share. And I will end my talk actually with a reminder. SEEDS is an ethics organization, but we're also a resource. Contact any one of us if you need help. And if we can't help you, we will find someone who can. This is a time for us to all come together, and it really warms my heart to see that that's exactly what we're doing. So if you're truly in a bind, and you even think you might close your doors, please reach out to us so we can help you, help your couples, and your surrogate moms, of course. So thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Right now, we're going to try and do the impossible. We get 20 minutes for 3 attorneys to speak, including Steve Snyder. So let's see how it goes. So I'm going to pull up questions, but Steve and Rich, Steve, you're already live. I think Rich is still on mute. So if you want to, any of the topics we've kind of talked about, any success you've had on both hospital visitation as well as getting parents in the country, out of the country, et cetera, maybe it's a good time to just do a little overview, and then Rich can jump in as well, and I'll start looking at questions that are coming in. For those of you who don't know too, before you start talking, if you didn't hear it earlier, there is a question box on the right side in the control panel. You can start feeding questions in. We'll get to as many or all if we can. Thanks. So,
Dino, can you possibly have Rich start?
Yeah, that's fine. I think he's live now.
Yeah, because he's summarized from a number of listservs various solutions that other people not on the panel have done. So I think he has some information, and then I'll jump in with comments after, especially since you had to note we have 20 minutes and Steve Snyder has to talk. Clearly, I've been reprimanded.
All right, well, I'll go ahead and take the floor then. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Dean. I'm just going to basically kind of review the issues that have been coming up. Some of this will be a repeat of what we discussed last week with new information sort of filtered in throughout. One of the things that keeps coming up a lot is contract issues or match issues. And the basic question is to pause or not to pause with matches, to pause or not to pause with contracts that are not finalized, or financial obligations for contracts that were just finalized prior to the shutdowns. And obviously these shutdowns create a lot of uncertainty, but I think the best thing for us to do and for our clients is to not panic and also not push anything forward until we know how this will affect everyone. We really shouldn't be doing anything that's going to cost our clients money unless we're going to also agree to do refunds if things go south or more south. And this goes for attorneys, it goes for agencies, it goes for doctors. We should all be doing the right thing. So I just wanted to say that first. So many of our clients have also been asking if we can still work on contracts while perhaps their medical screenings for their surrogates were on hold due to the clinic closures. And I've offered to go ahead and work on those contracts and do free redrafting. If for some reason we finish the contract and the surrogate eventually is not medically cleared. And I think the reviewing attorneys should do the same thing. In terms of contracts that were already or just recently finalized, it seems to me to be a calm and sensible approach to move forward with financial obligations, perhaps for 1 month, but then reevaluate in a few weeks or a month. That's not the only option, of course, but it's a suggestion. If you do get into a conversation about certain financial obligations to pause, it might be in several areas. One would be insurance premiums Obviously, we want the surrogates and donors to have that insurance, so that should probably continue depending on the circumstance. Monthly allowances for surrogates. I think if this goes on longer, it may make sense that perhaps we discuss with the surrogate about foregoing a monthly allowance in light of the fact that we're all in this together, and this is something that no one would have predicted. But that might be difficult for some surrogates. So perhaps you instead negotiate a wait fee for the surrogate. And if they agree to it, we have to understand, of course, the surrogate's not forced to remain committed to these parents. She may have life changes and a change of heart about the surrogacy, and that's okay. But if they are paying a wait fee for her to stick around and she decides to leave, perhaps there should be a refund to the intended parents if the surrogates change their mind. Lost wages is another area where we talked about last week. If time off from work is ordered by a doctor, then of course it usually is covered by the contract. But if it's time off to self-quarantine or they're forced to quarantine due to travel, then there could be some additional lost wages issues to look into. I say that's all sort of the difficult stuff. On a lighter note, there's some good news here. For us attorneys, you might find that prior requests to rush the contract drafting might be dropped because there's no rush right now. And I would say as well, many of your clients will be at home and actually able to join you on the scheduled calls together if they're couples. All right, let's move on now to getting court orders. Just briefly, of course, consider that courts may be closed entirely or closed just to the public, but operating behind closed doors, or maybe running on low staff. Consider whether the court allows e-filing. Perhaps things can still be maintained on schedule. There's about it's like 12 states, I think, that offer e-filing off the top of my head. Some courts are open for emergency petitions only, and what we were seeing last week was the courts were issuing orders to just close, and then they issued modified orders to allow for surrogacy parentage. So if you're in a jurisdiction where the orders are, say, closed completely, I think you should try again and get them to reconsider the urgency of surrogacy parentage cases. If your county is closed, can your clients stipulate to another venue if your county court is closed, or can you get a private judge to hear and perhaps sign your order? And also consider whether you have to have your court paperwork reviewed by the Attorney General's office or the Department of Public Health, which is the case in Pennsylvania and Georgia. If that's an absolute requirement, what if they're closed? So you need to think ahead and plan for that. In terms of clients getting here, you need to look at their travel visa or ESTA, and whether there is also an exception that could be gained for them to travel, exception to the travel ban due to them traveling for family. Consider that some ESTAs may not be automatically granted, or they might even be canceled, so plan ahead if you can, if your clients have the luxury of time to do that. In terms of getting an exception to the travel ban, consider putting as much administrative proof together as you can to build your case that the baby is their baby, even if the child isn't born yet, or if all you have is a pre-birth order. We've seen some situations where they've not been allowed to travel, even if we say there's a pre-birth order that's been signed. France, for instance, has been fairly strict on this and said if the baby's not born yet, we don't count that. So just keep pressing. If the clients cannot get here, they need to plan on drafting either temporary guardianship orders or temporary guardian documents, standby guardian documents, or powers of attorney, not only for medical care, but for custody of the child or children upon discharge, and for someone who could go to collect the birth certificate and the passport. Just make sure that whatever documents you draft will meet the requirements of the relevant state law. Be sure to think through as well whether that temporary guardian or healthcare agent can actually travel. We had a situation where someone was appointed last week, but they were in New York and they were unable to travel. Of course, intended parents can make decisions for the care of their child by phone or by video if the hospital is willing to make those calls. We've had that situation before, even before Corona, when parents can't get here in time for the birth. If the parents truly have no one that they could name as a temporary guardian, consider the resource that was mentioned by Carrie earlier on the Surrogacy Professionals Facebook group, or consider an organization called Safe Families for Children. And that was something that Julia Tate from Tennessee let us know about. It's an organization that you may be able to have some success with in terms of having someone local to care for the child while the parents are stuck or trying to get here. And Seth Grob in Colorado also recommended reaching out to local private adoption agencies to utilize their what's called cradle care homes. A lot of private adoption agencies have capacity to use their licensed homes for temporary care of a surrogates, of the children born through surrogacy. Okay, in terms of getting to the child or children, consider that some hospitals are not allowing parents or guardians or even the surrogate support person into the hospital. And these policies are changing frequently, so you must check with the Labor and Delivery Department on the most current policy. As was mentioned earlier, if the parents are not allowed in, consider having the family write a letter to the baby. That's good for them and for their mental health and for the baby's story. But who knows, try giving that letter to the hospital and see if those people still aren't going to allow these parents in. You may get some success there, who knows. One thing that just came up for me was I had a client that was not allowed in to the hospital. She had twins in Ohio that were born just last week, and she is in a position where she feels she can't name the babies until she gets to hold them. So you may have to work with the hospitals and find out how long they can hold their birth registration paperwork. And then we get to the issue of getting the birth certificate. These can be delayed. Some vital records offices may be closed, but I'm being told that they are still processing by mail, fax, or email requests in most cases. But if you cannot get a birth certificate, there is a small possibility that you can still apply for a passport for international clients. It can be challenging, but you could potentially use the State Department's form. It's called a DS-10. It's a birth affidavit. There are many things that you would need to add into the affidavit as you're preparing it. So if you have questions about that, let me know. Now, getting passports for the children. As you know, the State Department ceased processing expedited passport requests. It's really being delayed about 6 to 8 weeks, although we've heard that some have been successful in getting a US passport by submitting proof of a life or death emergency, quote unquote, with a letter from the hospital or the doctor that basically says that, you know, for the child, it's important that they get back home, because back home they will have medical care, it will be covered, and without that there are financial burdens and also potential for not getting the proper medical care that they need while here. That's worked in a few situations. As an alternative to getting a US passport, one alternative is to check with the home country or consulate to see if they could potentially issue a home country passport. If that's not available, some countries may issue something that's called a laissez-passer. It's French for let pass. It's a travel document issued by either a national government or some international organizations like United Nations, European Union, International Red Cross. And it can be a way to get a travel document for a baby to get home. So you might have to look into that as well. I think that's all I have. I know that was not a quick summary, but that's all I've got.
Steve,
Rich.
if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I just affirm everything Rich has said. He's organized, he's thorough, everything he said is accurate. A couple of addendums to his comments. The Safe Families Network that Julia Tate shared should be your first go-to, because those are homes that are already in the foster care network for babies being put up for adoption and other circumstances, that have criminal background checks, home studies, and are licensed. They have the protections in place so that if something happens to the child, we don't have to worry about insurance or other issues for their liability. If you're going to use someone that isn't in that kind of orientation, insurance for the caregivers to protect them is one option. But if you can't get it, you need a very clear legal document that's a complete release and indemnification that's been negotiated and signed between the parties, and that can act as a protection. It won't guarantee any money to the parents if something goes wrong, but it will guarantee protection to the caregiver. So you need to make sure there's documentation of some sort in place if there are alternatives used. As for the hospital contact, parents getting into hospitals is going to be very inflexible. It's going to vary state by state. It's going to vary hospital by hospital. And you're not going to have legal means of forcing your way in. So it's more a question of whether or not you can convince them equitably, and that's highly unlikely. So there are two issues. One, can you have contact with your child? If you can't get in the hospital, the answer is going to be no. Some hospitals have cuddle programs, again, for babies possibly being put up for adoption, where the staff gives human contact. That's probably preferable than forcing the surrogate to have the personal care in the hospital. As for decision making, that can be done remotely as long as you have documentation in place transferring parental authority to the intended parents, or if you have a pre-birth order that gives them that authority. So as long as you have documentary authority to the parents, they can still make decisions even if they can't get in the hospital. And so make sure you're aware of that. The rest of it, I think Rich has mentioned. My last comment is going to be this. We're all in this together. This is a horrendously unexpected, weighty situation that is throwing off tons of unexpected consequences. As an attorney, as an attorney, do not see this as an opportunity for me to make more money from intended parents or the circumstances because things have gone south and extra documents are needed. When I have clients in the middle of this for which I've charged a regular fee, if I've got some extra work to do, I'm going to do it free. And I think we should all think about that compassionate balance. Now, obviously, the attorneys on this call also need to make a living, but I encourage you to balance your altruism with the need to charge for your services. And I, for one, am advocating for a great deal of altruism as we go through this and providing support without necessarily enhancing the already exorbitant cost of having children through surrogacy.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to stay on. I know some people have a hard leave and some have had to leave already, and there are questions. The only things I wanted to mention from a legal side that haven't been mentioned is I happened to just get a colleague give me the number to a kind of international immigration / adoption specialist. And while she didn't have a 100% clear-cut answer to help our parents to get here who are either having children or may have already had one child and they're coming back for birth too, was they need to call the consulate offices in their country for the US to try and get these visas if the ESTA visas are gone and they can't get on a plane. She said the trick is, even if they're not technically US citizens living abroad, that usually that number at the US consulate office, people are manning it because there are a lot of Americans stuck overseas trying to get home, and they're the ones that are most used to precarious situations to assist. So she said, you know, have your intended parents call, explain the situation. They may have court orders in place that prove they're legal guardians already. And if that's the case, they can at least have that conversation, and maybe it gets them a visa and they don't get in the country once they get here. But they said call the number regarding services for American citizens living abroad. So that was one tip I got. I know Bruce Hale, who's a member of our committee, shared that at least he got an email that didn't particularly say what's needed to get intended parents or parents here, but it did say that potentially they look at documents other than birth certificates, you know, to get around the exemption. So at least gives the ability, as Rich said, compile as much administrative documentation as possible, both pre and after birth, if there's a long time waiting for birth certificates. We actually, one of our clients from Switzerland who petitioned their, or not petitioned, but called the U.S. Consulate in Switzerland, at least got, you know, the word from the consular office, and nothing has been set in stone yet and nothing's happened, but they said they could potentially issue the visa based on the pre-birth order. This is coming from the Swiss embassy, but gave the caveat that that doesn't mean Homeland will let you in once you get to customs in the US. What we told them is if you can get that visa, you're probably standing a better chance of having a fighting way to get in once you're here than if you just continue to wait to see what happens. So I think it's giving our parents, as Rich and everyone else on this panel has said, is giving them as many opportunities, you know, tell them to try everything, and obviously we assist them in it, but the more things they try, the better chance they're going to have a luck of making it here. So the first question, it's somewhat been answered, but it's basically, since we know that pregnant women may not even have a support person at all, let alone the intended parents, how are we preparing our IPs for this situation? Let me unmute everyone just in case they can't unmute themselves. I think it's both from a agency, legal, and mental health perspective. As much preparation as you can give them to let them know, it's a situation we may not be able to get around. They're really trying. The hospitals are doing this out of an abundance of care and safety for everyone involved. As Steve mentioned, electronically, if the intended parents are in touch with the surrogate through video, through Skype, through phone call, they're still going to be able to make decisions, et cetera. It's just going to be an impact. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on other ways to prepare intended parents for this situation.
Well, before I leave, Dean, and sometimes the surrogate doesn't want to be a conduit. I just had a conference call with a surrogate in South Dakota that's facing this issue, and she was very reluctant to be taking and giving instructions for medical care for the child. And following up with the hospital said, as long as we have documentation on file that the parents who are outside the hospital have legal authority, whether temporary or permanent, over the child, the hospital will speak directly to them. So there's also the option of taking the surrogate out as the middle person in that conversation, which I think some surrogates will want and appreciate.
Thanks, Steve. Let me see. Sarah, for open enrollment, has there been any, have they said how long it will be in place, months, is it indefinitely, or has there been no set timeline on when open enrollment will end?
Oh, so all of the open enrollment dates are listed on the Surrogacy Professional Board, but I will go through those real quick with everybody.
And there's a couple questions for you. Just so you know, there's a couple in a row for you, so I'm going to hit you up right after this one too.
California is June 30th, Colorado is April 3rd, Connecticut is April 2nd, DC is June 15th, Maryland April 15th, Minnesota April 21st, Massachusetts April 25th, Nevada April 15th, New York April 15th, Rhode Island April 15th, Vermont April 20th, and Washington April 8th.
There's a question, and I think your answer is going to be you have to speak to your policyholder, but can one use their personal umbrella policy versus a business umbrella policy if they're taking care of a child?
That is going to go back to going back to their broker ultimately. They would have to take a look at their underlying policy, because an umbrella is essentially an extension of your underlying policy.
And any updates on life insurance fixed to cover COVID?
So the life insurance fixed to cover COVID would be a term life policy. So if there are situations like that, let us know. If there's somebody currently pregnant, if we need to try and switch them. The reality is, with the life insurance term life, it would be pretty hard to get right now, especially with being pregnant. So, but we can try.
Excellent. So just a comment on the SBA loan application process or calling that had been mentioned earlier. It's actually been changed and shifted now to PDF forms as of this morning. So you can now just go right online, complete the forms, and upload them directly to the SBA. So just an update as well, people that want to join the Surrogacy Professionals group, there are questions that need to be answered when you're joining. As long as all the questions are answered, this is from Adrian Black, who's the moderator there, she'll be able to add people as quickly as possible. So just make sure you answer all the questions that are indicated on that professionals page. Dr. Danishman, if you're still there, there's a question. Can you just name those 2 medications again that have been used for pregnant women who have COVID?
Sure. These are ongoing clinical trials. So these 2 medications are not being used right now clinically in hospitals, at least in the United States. If you want to use these medications, you have to be in a clinical trial. So the first one is the antiviral medication called remdesivir, REMDESIVIR. And the way that particular medication works is that the virus has to replicate in order for it to enhance its infection potential. So what this particular medication, remdesivir, does is prevents the replication of the virus, because the virus needs a particular enzyme called the RNA polymerase in order for it to duplicate its RNA and genetic sequence, and so it could proliferate. And this medication basically battles the virus at the level of replication. The clinical trials are ongoing, and we'll have the first 2 clinical trials will have the results in the first 2 weeks of April. The other medication that's being used sparingly, but mostly in clinical trials, is chloroquine. And chloroquine is a medication that's used for malaria, but it's also been used outside of the FDA-approved indication for malaria. So it has been used, for example, previously for treatment of Ebola virus and other viral infections. And at this particular point, it seems to have some effects, because it was used in Italy and some other European countries. There seems to be some efficacy against the COVID-19 virus. But again, ongoing clinical trials are really needed. So that's the second medication. Now, there are many medications right now, for example, that are being used. Many of them are not indicated during pregnancy because of potential risk of malformations of the fetus.
Thank you. So there's a question about the passport life and death exception. Which doctor does one request a letter expressing the medical insurance need for international parents who are trying to get a passport? So I've seen it 3 different ways now. I've seen both the delivering doctor, OBGYN of the surrogate was signed one. I've seen one where a pediatrician that had seen the first kind of the 2-week visit with the child. We've drafted them as well from the law firm and from the agency, kind of along the same lines, not from a as a doctor saying there's a medical life, but just saying in general, these people don't have health insurance to cover. They have full health insurance at home. They have a newborn child. If anything happens or the baby was to contract the virus, they don't have the ability to pay, et cetera. So I think it can be done. Whoever you can get the letter from, I think works. I don't know if, Rich, if you've done any of these yet or not. I know Steve's firm got one done, and I believe that one was the delivering OBGYN.
Yeah, I agree, Dean. It would be, whoever you can get to sign. It carries some weight if it's coming from a doctor who says, there's a baby that needs medical care.
Rich, what's the French title of the temporary travel document you talked about through the State Department?
You're going to make me butcher my French.
I know. We need Bruce. I wish I could unmute Bruce.
It's laissez-passer. I'll spell it for you. It is LAISSEZ hyphen P as in Paul, ASSER.
Excellent. And I'll try and send a link out. I see who sent this, or we can try and put it on the surrogacy professionals page. It might be something we could have Fabian, Jolie, or Caroline write about as well.
Actually, Dean.
Oh, so I'm sorry. We have a French speaker on the line.
No, I wasn't. I was going to mention to you that one of the French attorneys, Clélia Richard, has written it on the surrogacy professionals Facebook page in regard to the document.
That's right. That's right. So we'll try, and I'll try and just hyperlink that to our listserv as well. But there is definitely on the Surrogacy Professionals Board a little piece on laissez-passer, or however you pronounce it.
Yeah, laissez-passer. Yeah, that's correct.
So Carol, I don't know if you're still here. Someone had asked if there is a best source of financial assistance for potentials for sole practicing attorneys, or would sole practitioners qualify for any of the benefits under the unemployment / the new coronavirus package? I don't know if you're
I am
aware
here.
of that. Oh, hi, Carol.
So if they pay themselves as an employee, absolutely. The new the $2 trillion package, the stimulus bill, will also be helpful. But these others, the Response Act and it will not help self-employed people. But this other one has a potential to do that. Otherwise, you'll just have to contact each of your providers, that are credit cards and all of that, and discuss something with them. But no, these reliefs are not, unfortunately, intended for that.
Thank you. The other comment that kind of went along with that is from a mortgage deferral. Just if you do call up and ask for it, just be safe when asking the mortgage company. Is it going to be a full deferral where once you start paying again, you're only paying 1 month at a time, or is just they're not hitting you with 3 to 6 months of mortgage payments due at once? So
correct.
Just,
And I read further into that, and it is that it is literally a deferment. And when you start in 6 months, 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is, you just start where you left off. It's almost like a freeze.
Excellent, thank you.
Mhm.
Let's see. A comment just, I think it's kind of Rich and Steve have said, is each hospital is treating differently. Someone just said they just had a hospital that allowed not only the surrogate to have 2 support people, but once the baby was born, the baby to have a support person. So obviously just keep in touch with your hospitals and keep in touch with your clients just to see if things are changing so there's no surprises, and make your clients aware that there could be surprises even though everything seems perfect in that hospital prep. Someone asked if IPs are not allowed in the hospital for delivery, can they sign a POA for the GC to care for the baby until discharge? Basically, yes. If Rich, you want to jump on there?
Yeah, I mean, look, if the baby's still in the hospital staff, the nurses and doctors can take care of the baby and call the parents to make decisions on anything that needs to be decided.
Okay. There's a question which actually, thank you for asking this, because Rich and I had this conversation this week as well as on our little listserv. But under U.S. law, if people are required to, U.S. citizens are required to leave the U.S. on a U.S. passport and enter the U.S. on a U.S. passport, how do you get around that? So I had this question. I reached out to an immigration attorney this week, and yes, while it is a technical violation of the law for U.S. citizens to leave the country on, say their German passport to get around that waiting period. In the 1970s, they removed the penalty that had anything to do with that statute, so there's no actual penalty. And under these circumstances, the thought in the immigration field is even if they were to try and ding that child on future trips to the United States, they don't think they would under these circumstances because obviously it's a way for just someone to get home quickly. They said it used to be used against people to say that it was a renouncement of citizenship and the US would have the right to take citizenship away from that person. But again, in these circumstances, I think there is an argument, or a simple argument to be made that they're doing it under, dire experiences of a global pandemic where they just want to get home and have the full care. So while it is a technical violation of US immigration law, the immigration specialists, at least I've talked to, don't believe it would result in any penalty to leave on their foreign passport versus waiting for a US passport. Let's see. Can Rich go back to the government form he mentioned in lieu of birth certificate? Where can we get that? I think that's the DS-10, Rich.
Correct. That's the DS-10. It's a birth affidavit. It's typically not used for this situation. Surprise, surprise. It's typically used for a situation where you have an adult that's applying for the passport and they don't have their birth certificate. They can't find it. So the birth affidavit is usually signed by someone who can attest to that person, and that person is a US citizen. They've known them for a long period of time, and you explain how you know this person. It's the only mechanism we have right now to potentially apply for a passport without a birth certificate. So you would have to add as much documentation as you possibly could to help support that affidavit. And because it's a special situation scenario that the document, even invites, it gets a lot of extra scrutiny. Now, I would hope that maybe under these situations, they would understand, but you just have to be prepared that it may not work, but it's a possibility.
Yeah. I know at least in the last 5 years, we had to do it once where it was just a huge delay in a birth certificate. And we had to submit affidavits from doctors, from the parents, et cetera. And it worked in that case, but again, it's not a guarantee, as Rich is saying.
Yeah, I've had it work and not work in the past. So
welcome to the world of surrogacy law amidst COVID as well. Sarah, are accidental death policies reimbursable? I guess meaning if they switch over to a term policy.
That is a very good question, and typically the answer is no. Once they're bound for 18 months, and or up to 18 months, and there's not a refund on the policy if there has already been a confirmed pregnancy.
Okay. Does Dr. Danishmand-Feinberg see a possibility? Neither are here, so we won't answer that. But the question is, I'll say it and we'll try and get an answer. Do they see the possibility of opening clinics on a limited basis to medical screenings and allowing the process to continue up to transfer? I mean, I'm not sure, and Rich, I don't know if you know offhand, but I think some clinics are still open for screenings. Maybe not all of them. Some are taking probably a more strict view of ASRM, but I've definitely, we've even seen clinics saying they're open for transfers still. But Rich, I don't know if you want to jump on. I don't know if you've heard anything.
Most clinics are pausing things. I have heard of a couple of clinics just with cases that I've had where they're still moving forward.
Okay. As an FYI, someone got an appointment by contacting a U.S. senator of the state where the IPs were in to get a U.S. passport appointment outside the life death emergency exception. So that's good. So I think, I don't know if people know Robin Pope out of Oregon, but I know she's been compiling lists of upcoming births to petition local congressmen and senators of her state to say this is an issue that's happening. I think anyone on this, if you have close connections with your congressman or U.S. senator or know people that do, I think it is a issue that should be brought to their attention as much as possible. I think the more people that do it, and might even be worth potentially in the next couple of weeks compiling a huge list to give them a total number of people that could potentially be hurt by this current policy. So obviously the more ways to do it, so thank you for that response, but share in the group, share in the listserv, share in the different Facebook panels we have, just so that everyone knows what's going on to help. Can we send Carol's information around, please? I know Carol said it's on Carol, if you want to jump on. I know a lot of the stuff you mentioned is on the SEEDS website already. I don't know if you're okay with me sending your email address out as well.
Of course.
Okay. So we'll put it to the group. So if anyone wants to get directly in touch, but I believe she said a lot of the information she gave is on SEEDS board already. SEEDS website.
Yeah, and my email is easier probably with SEEDS, so it's carol@seedsethics.org. Carol, no E. So Carol at seedsethics.org.
So someone just mentioned the stimulus package that passed this morning said that unemployment would now cover the self-employed. Can attorneys without employees file for that? Does anyone know that offhand?
No, but I will research it now. The information I had was as of last night, but I'm happy to do that.
Thanks, Carol. Sarah, if open enrollment, can you say if open enrollment right now only applies to surrogates who don't have other insurance, or could they have a policy with a surrogacy exclusion, or is it solely getting people coverage to protect them from COVID, so it's only for uninsured?
It's only for uninsured because it is for the protection of COVID.
Okay. Thank you. There's a comment that someone believes Fort Worth Fertility is still moving forward at present with screenings and transfers. So obviously check with the clinics. Some are probably active with some of their cases, whereas others are taking the kind of ASRM lockdown approach. So that you can keep, if you want to send in any more questions, feel free to. As I said, obviously and Steve has mentioned, and everyone on this board has mentioned, we're better when we're doing this all together. So whether it's the ABA listserv, the Quad A listserv, the SEEDS pages, the Surrogacy Professionals Board, anything you come across that is positive or negative, anything you're seeing in your state or your clients from overseas, let the teams know. If you need some of the documents we mentioned today, if you need those letters or templates to those letters, reach out to us. We all are trying to share as much as we can so that we can assist each other in this situation. But I think that's it. So I'll send this out once it's uploaded. We're going to try and do it an hour and a half every week. As I said, we can try and rotate some speakers here and there, as well as I'm sure every other little group is having their own webinars too. So keep sharing the information. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks,
and
Steve.
thanks this wonderful panel again for giving up a big chunk of your day to be a part of this. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.